I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and it is my great good fortune to be with all of you tonight in New York. But also, we are here to celebrate the Kweli Journal, and there is a new anthology, Sing the Truth. It's a story collection, and I'm going to start by asking everyone who's up here on stage with me to introduce themselves, if you wouldn't mind. We're going to start with Laura and run across.
Thank you, Miwa. It's a joy to be with you tonight. I am the founding editor and publisher of Kweli Journal. We are 15 years old, and the anthology includes some of the work that I fell in love with on first read,
right?
Including the short story by Princess Joy L. Perry, which appeared in our inaugural issue.
Okay, but Laura, you also have to tell people your name.
I do this all the time.
I know, which is why I'm reminding you.
Thank you. My name is Laura Pegram.
And Edwidge Danticat, who I've been reading since I was a baby bookseller.
I'm Edwidge Danticat, and I wrote the foreword to Sing the Truth. I am a writer and a great supporter of Kweli, an admirer of Laura and Princess and everybody in this wonderful book.
Hi, I'm Princess Joy L. Perry, Princess. I am a writer and a teacher of literature and composition, and I'm about to swoon because I'm sitting next to Edwidge Danticat. But I'm trying to play it cool, but I think that didn't work so well. And a longtime friend now of Laura Pegram.
We're book people. We don't have to play it cool.
Okay, good.
That's not what we do.
Excited.
If we were going to sit and play it cool, we would, although I don't know how many of you know that Laura has a secret past life as a jazz singer, which we have to talk about because I love the idea of you being a multi-hyphenate who decided that, circumstances had changed, and you said, circumstances have changed, so I'm going to make a thing instead of I'm going to sit around and knock my head against a wall. You decided to create a community. And I really... this is going to go out into the airwaves later. And yes, there are plenty of people who know Kweli, but there are also lots of folks who don't. So I'm going to ask you to share the origin story, as it were. Oh, superhero. I would like the origin story, please.
You got it. I didn't bring my cape tonight,
okay,
so I apologize for that. But I will say that Kweli was created out of loss. And what do I mean by that? When I woke up one morning, early morning at around 3:30, it was because my head literally felt as if it was exploding. And there was a new detonation every 3 to 4 minutes. And I knew I was in trouble when I tried to walk and my leg felt like cooked spaghetti. That's what I kept telling the ER doctor. It's like, my leg feels like cooked spaghetti, and can you stop the explosions? Like, just please, begging them. After I was released from the hospital, I needed something to hold on to. The doctors were not giving me a good chance of ever getting out of the wheelchair. My prognosis was poor, and so I had to find some light. And I thought about how much I missed my students at the Frederick Douglass Creative Arts Center, where I used to donate my time and teach. I said, well, what if I did something from home? I didn't know how to start. I didn't know how to even begin. But the ideas kept growing over months and years. And 2 years after I became disabled, I started Kweli. We launched our first issue with Princess and a few other writers who I came to love and adore. I quickly learned how hard it was to run a nonprofit and to talk into a microphone. But I was lucky in that I met Edwidge Danticat a few years later and asked her to keynote our first full-day conference, and she said, to my joy, yes, I'd be happy to. And this was after coming from another event. Like, she could have elected to go home to her family that she hadn't seen in some time, but she still said yes to our invitation. This small literary journal and nonprofit that was still trying to gain our footing. She made time for us, and I am still eternally grateful. Thank you so much, Edwidge.
And this is where community comes in.
This is where it comes in.
This is exactly. You've built programming. You've built an education piece. You've built the magazine.
Yes.
You, in fact, have a Whiting Award for literary magazines, which is not a small thing. Maybe not the most famous thing, but it's not a small thing to get a Whiting Creative. Is it a magazine? I should have had the exact title of the prize, but it is. It's a Whiting Magazine Award, yeah?
Yes, Whiting Literary Magazine.
Okay, there we go. Anyway, it is a big deal. It is a really big deal. So part of what I love, too, about what you've been able to accomplish since 2009, so here we are sitting almost 16 years into it, is that the magazine has continued to grow and has continued. I mean, I keep meeting writers who now are putting books out into the world, and they're like, oh, and I published there first. And I'm like, yeah, I know. That's how I figured out who you were, and that's how I knew not to follow you. I mean, because let's face it, discovery is hard, right? Like, it is getting harder and harder for any of us to cut through the noise. Yes. So, I mean, it's delightful to have sort of a beacon to follow. And Edwidge, I mean, Krak was what, 1992?
1995.
1995. Okay, that was the first story. There was the first novel, and then the story collection. Okay.
So I did the reverse.
Yeah, right. Okay, you did the reverse.
Yeah.
Princess has been publishing stories, but the first novel comes out in August,
yes.
which we're very excited about. We're going to come back to the novel. Okay. But part of what I'm excited to be able to do tonight is not just talk about community, but also talk about craft. And there is this perception that novels grow out of short stories, but and I'm watching head shake in that. Yes, but they're very different disciplines, and I'd just love to get some of your thoughts, Edwidge and Princess, about sort of what you can do with a story that you can't necessarily do with a novel. And I'm not talking about length, right? They are different art forms, but you have freedom with the story collection and with a story that you might not actually have with a novel because of the compression.
I was actually thinking the reverse as you were saying that. I was thinking that in the novel, I was able to investigate the motives behind the actions more.
Okay.
In the short story, I have to show the action, and maybe I have room to hint at some possible reasons why. But in the novel, I was able to, even though not everything made it to the page, I was able to really understand and explore the reasons why my characters were acting out in the ways that they were, or not acting in the ways that they were supposed to.
Okay.
Well, I did start writing stories before I wrote a novel. And I would write them, a lot of my stories, kind of, and I tell students I don't recommend this, but I would have like an economics final the next day and suddenly be gloriously inspired with with a story idea. And I think what I appreciate in stories is the economy of it, and you kind of, someone had compared it to a photograph, and Laura brought us this beautiful book of photographs, right, and in the photograph, you know something happened before and something happened after, but in that moment you're luxuriating in the moment,
right?
And I think stories are kind of like that, and so stories actually, because I learned to write stories from listening to stories,
right.
And so I think stories for me were a kind of school for the novel, and one of the things that's a little bit harder in a novel is to be able to hold the whole world in your head.
Yes.
And so you get to like that practice in bits in writing stories.
I'm going to quote you for a second, Edwidge. There's a line you have about Polly Marshall talking about kitchen table poets, and that's how you learned kitchen poets. Excuse me. That's part of how you have emerged as a writer. And I love the idea that we can take these stories, right, that aren't formally taught, and claim them in ways that could be unexpected for people both in and outside of the community. I think of short stories as hinges, right? There's the before and the after, and that for me is the fun of reading. I love stories, and I love story collections, and actually Princess and I were talking about the last story in Edwidge's last collection, Everything Inside, which I'm not going to spoil for any of you. But it is, and actually I didn't spoil it for Princess either. I'm just saying, it is a high note to end a story collection on, and I promise you, you will not forget. And I've read it multiple times, and every single time there's something new in this story.
That's how you know it's a good story.
Right?
Yes, the layers.
But the hinge moment in that story is wild. And just the way it is. So, yeah, that's me saying go find that story. Building community. Right? Using language to build community, ideas, words. When do you know you have the idea that's worth chasing? I mean, you created a magazine, you've sung songs, you've done music, but you have to know when. I mean, you've got 8 ideas in front of you. Which is the one you chase? How do you know which one is the one?
I had been singing for years, and suppose small clubs in New York, and then when I lived abroad in Paris, I continued to perform there. But with Kweli, it was one choice because I was still very limited.
Okay.
I was home most of the time with pretty much round-the-clock care for a period. Physical therapists would come 3 times a week and tell me, try to move your leg like this much.
Right.
And he kept hope alive, even though others kicked it to the curb. You know, with being homebound more times than not, with the exception of going back and forth to doctors, I knew that I needed something that I could do from my living room or from my bedroom. And the idea of Kweli came then because I could take what I started while I was teaching the art of the short story at the Cultural Center and then bring it to a digital place.
But you're also going through submissions and deciding who makes the cut and who doesn't.
Yes.
I mean, it is kind of a luxurious problem to have, but you do, I mean, how do you know when you found, well, the story that sings?
I know immediately upon reading if I want to race to read it once again, or if I have to stop myself from picking up the phone at 2 in the morning to call one of the contributors, which is what happened in the case of Princess Perry. I was reading it late and had to literally stop myself from picking up the phone to dial her number and ask if the story was still available. Because I
love
had lost
those moments.
Yes.
I love those moments.
I had lost a few stories because they were picked up by another magazine. But on reading, if I feel this immediate connection with the character and place, and I'm longing to know what's going to happen next, it's an immediate yes for me. You know, it's almost as if everything around me stops, and I am part of this world and not just the reader.
Edwidge, your last book was a collection of essays. We're Alone. I mean, you have gone from novels to personal memoir to short stories to essay. I mean, how do you know what the form needs to be?
It's kind of like what Laura is saying. I think you follow the form. And so to a certain, like sometimes I think I'm writing a novel, like the story you're talking about from Everything Inside Without Inspection. And there was another story in that book that I thought were novels, right? And then they kept getting longer, but not much was happening. And then I realized I just kind of enjoy being in this world. But it's really a short story. So sometimes there's a trial and error, I think, in those choices. But I know, like, nonfiction for me is always somewhat urgent. It's something I always feel like, oh, this is the only way I can say this. And it needs to be said now, as opposed to, you know, fiction, you have to, like, simmer in that world. You have to create people. You have to, you know, they have to do things like for you to get to know them. So it's a much longer and more involved process than for me than the nonfiction.
So you said, how do you know the idea is
Yeah,
the
how
one
do
that
you
you
know?
want to follow?
Yeah.
I don't have the number of stories, or so I've written. I think I've published maybe 4 or 5 short stories, and now the novel. And it's taken me a long time to get to the novel. But for me, I think the idea that I want to follow is the one that has many complex reasons why it could have happened, why the situation could have happened.
Right.
Many ways that the story could have gone, and many possible ways that it could work out for the characters if someone makes one choice rather than another. If someone chooses to be kind rather than be cruel, then the
Right.
world could be, for that character, totally different. And so what happens if you choose the cruel choice, or what happens if you choose the kind choice, and what are the things that make that character, when I can't figure out, well, why would someone behave this way? That's, I think, usually at least the character
Right.
that I follow, because I'm trying to figure it out.
I keep hearing all of you talk about connection. Every single answer comes back to connection, whether you're connecting to the character or you're connecting to the person who's writing the story. It's all about connection. And there's an idea that reading is a passive act, right? You're just sitting, hanging out with a book, maybe a snack. But it's a very, very passive
Always a snack.
Well, yeah, I do really like to snack while I read.
Popcorn.
But yes, actually.
A favorite. Yes.
But the idea that reading is a passive act to me is pretty ridiculous. Because if you think about how you end up traveling through time or space, or you end up living someone else's life in unexpected ways, right? And yet it all comes back to connection. You're connecting with the language, you're connecting with the voice, you're connecting with the characters, you're connecting with the story. You get to build a world.
Yes.
You get to build a world in unexpected ways. And one of the worlds that all of you have helped build with support for Kweli is these new careers. And there's an audience question. So how does it feel to have helped all of these folks along? And I'm going to add, you also both teach. So, I mean, you've seen your students come into their own and do their thing. So how does it feel being sort of there as new talent emerges?
Oh my. It is the greatest joy. I feel as if I am witnessing the creation of a talent who's going to soar and become a household name.
Yeah.
Whose stories will really change each individual who spends time with their pages. Like, I felt that when I first read your short story in 2009, and knew that when your novel appeared, it would have the same impact on readers as your story did for me.
Thank you.
As the opening pages of your novel, because I haven't finished it yet, as the opening pages have for me. And there's just great pride as well, knowing how long you committed to the process of writing, because this developed over years while you were teaching full time, and your teaching load was always quite heavy.
Yes.
There wasn't a moment to breathe oftentimes between all the papers that you had to
about that
read.
many times.
Yes.
Semesters.
So you had a small summer because classes started again in August. So you start your summer break and then you're back.
Yep.
Immediately.
School ends, and then I have maybe a week to kind of do the laundry and pull my life back together and make sure I, check the email to see who's not quite happy with their grade and make those changes. And then it's, get myself set up for writing. And that's we've been talking about that for years, back and forth for years. But it turned out to be worth it.
Not complaining. I am reading your novel now, and I'm delighted.
Thank you.
Edwidge?
I mean, I think it's like, I often compare, I'll say to students, like midwifing.
Oh, yeah.
Because they come often with the brilliance, right?
Yep.
And you have to, like, I will tell students the first day, I'm helping you see your patterns.
Right.
Maybe these things that, like, that are just kind of like don't work generally for you in stories, but that and we can talk about ways to overcome them. I'll bring in my my editorial letters and my marked up manuscripts.
Oh wow!
Yeah, to show like we all get edited, and that's important also to talk about the logistics of it. I had a wonderful editor who was who midwifed like my first story, I would say, and actually both my daughters were born with midwives, so they say they caught your baby. So I'm like, I'm here to catch your story. Oh. But Laura, my editor, used to say that, she says, if I notice something, at least count me for like 10 readers, right? And so maybe 10 other people will notice it. And how much does that matter to you? So I will bring all the things that I learned in this editorial process into the classroom, but assure people that, of course, like you're in this class or you're in this process because you already have talent. You're just trying to figure out how to present it to the world.
Which brings me back to another sort of misconception that you're sort of working alone in a garret. I mean, writing and publishing is a really collaborative process, and there are great editors in the business who have been able to do amazing things, and I love sort of watching something emerge. Yes. Right? And when you have the right combination of people, I love the idea that you share your the marked up drafts. I mean, that feels really profound because I've seen the finished product and I'm like, oh, right, there was editing that happened here. Yeah. It didn't just show up like this. I mean, there was, even Edwidge has an editor. But what have you learned from your students?
I'm thinking, my students are undergraduates, and I guess I'm still thinking about your previous question, how good it feels I think I feel a little bit of desperation for the ones who, like, they're there and I see that spark, but they're undergraduates and they haven't necessarily committed to English, and there's so many different ways they could go. Right. And then you see that thing on the page and that makes you go, you're one of us. And it's clear that this should be an important part of your life. And I feel that desperation to make them see, please, stick with the writing in some form or fashion, stick with the writing. And maybe that's what I've learned from my students, that you have to stick with it, and you have to find people who are as invested or as in love with the written word as you are. And if you stick together, you can kind of take care of each other, because outside of the classroom, off the campus, maybe people don't care if you write so much, but you can do it if you find the people who care about it too. Yeah. I
mean, students are always bringing up readings, things I have not read,
Yes,
or films I haven't seen, or so I learn a lot of that from them, because they're also not only students these days are not just involved in culture, but they're watching it emerge, like on TikTok and all these things that I may not be attuned to. So I've gotten a lot of reading recommendations from my students. Sometimes some like poets that are just emerging on Instagram that I've never heard of, but are doing some interesting things. So and a lot of my assignments will have resources, like like the weekly assignments will say, well, what other things should we be looking at that are not on the syllabus for this particular lesson? And often there's so much there that I bring into the classroom that they've recommended, that then we put side by side with what we're teaching.
I mean, writing is thinking, right? Writing teaches you to think. Thinking doesn't necessarily teach you to write. So the idea that we can pull from all of these different kinds of inspiration, and I'm going to ask Laura to talk about the book that she has with her, which I'm going to let you explain the story behind that book, but I think it's important for people to, because it is a piece of inspiration for you.
It is indeed. This is a photography book that I discovered through Toni Morrison's intro. So I discovered the intro and then I found the book. So the intro is called The Fisherwoman, and the book is A Kind of Rapture, photographs by Robert Bergman. and they are stunning. You feel as if you're getting almost the interior lives of the photos that you're studying, and I'll show you a few.
But they're portraits too. Right?
They're portraits, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Stunning.
And in Toni Morrison's essay, she spoke specifically about language and how saying, listening, reading can encourage the breach of distances among us, whether that distance is continental or on the same pillow, whether the distances are a result of cultural, whether the distances are the result of social invention or biography, or the distinctions or indistinctions of age or gender. And when I thought about that definition, I thought about how Kweli kind of folds itself within that, right? How I choose pieces that can breach the distances. And it's in the foremost of my mind with each issue that I edit, each piece that I read, and then invite into a specific issue with a central theme. It's so critically important to me, and I feel nourished, and I hope that the readers who find their way to a particular issue or to the anthology feel equally nourished by spending time with the stories on the digital site or within the anthology itself.
Can we also talk about literary influences, though? Because I know all three of you have very strong literary influences and have had great teachers.
Yes. I'll start with June Jordan because she was my mentor and second mother. I would see her if I was admitted to the hospital, which was a regular thing. It got to the point where people on campus would joke and tease me and say, with your frail constitution, you should just set up house in the hospital. Really, that should be your dorm room, one of the hospital rooms. June would come in and she would have books and flowers and have me laughing, even if I was in incredible pain. Somehow she managed that each and every time. And she encouraged my writing after taking just one class with her. And her short stories had pulled me in with such a force. I was writing stories outside of class, which she shared with a group of her sister writers. And I thought, oh my goodness, she recognizes something here on the page. Now, my pages were marked up from top to bottom, margin notes, questions that you wanted me to consider on the last page. And then I went back and enjoyed the process of revising them because I wanted to get better and I wanted to learn. And then she would mark up the next draft and then the next. But when it was ready and when it was a story, she would say, now this is a story. And that was all the encouragement I needed to soar. She did the same thing for my music when we were at her Brooklyn brownstone. There were a few of us, and most of them were in the kitchen eating, and I was kind of tinkling with the piano and singing, and softly. But then I turned around, and they were all standing at the door to the kitchen. It's like, Laura, you can sing. And I said, y'all are nosy. You were supposed to be having a meal. But that was the beginning of her encouraging me with music. And we said, why don't we do a performance that features the songs of Billie Holiday? And I did the graphic art for the performance, and she said, and you paint. So she encouraged me in all the ways and literally said that the sky is your ceiling. Whatever you dream, you can realize. And I carried that with me every step along the way. Anytime I had a dream, even if there were naysayers who said, well, what do you know, say, about starting a literary mag? I said, what I don't know, I can teach myself, right? Which has always been my way. If people said, well, you never formally studied the piano, I said, I can teach myself. And I've done that every point, at every step, and I never allow anyone to tell me no. hard-headed still, hard-headed always. No, it's just not in my vocabulary. If I see something, then I know I can make it happen. So June, yeah, I credit her with everything. Yeah.
Edwidge?
Since you already brought up Paul Marshall, yeah, Paul Marshall was so generous to me when she blurbed Krak and then invited me to. She had actually a series called something like Next Generation, and I think Helen Washington. There's a wonderful biography of her coming out soon that folks should let. It's one. I think it's the first one, but it will be exciting. She had a Next Generation series where she would invite younger writers.
Right.
So she invited me. She invited A.J. Verdell and other people, and then one day she invited me to lunch. And said, "Oh, do you want to come teach at NYU?" Like that's how I actually started teaching at NYU. And Emily, who is in my classes here from NYU, and I remember she had me to lunch in her campus apartment, and I said, "Oh, Ms. Marshall, how did you get such a glorious apartment here?" She says, "Well, when they interviewed me, I was in the dean's office, and they said, 'Where do you want to live?' And I said, 'Something like this.'" And when I had trouble with the students, she would actually call them in and talk to them, and she was so funny. So it was really Paul Marshall for that period of my life, that transition from writer to teacher.
That's amazing.
I love that craft essay, Poets in the Kitchen.
Yeah,
and I've used it as well.
Essay. Yeah.
Yes.
So for me, the first book that I ever loved is a book called Josie's Handful of Quietness by a writer named Nancy Covert Smith. And I got this book when I was in the second grade, and I still have a copy. And it's so beaten up. And it has my big block handwriting telling everyone who the book belongs to. And every now and then, I still read it over the summer. The two writers who taught me how I wanted to write or what I wanted to be able to create were, of course, Toni Morrison, Sula. I could read that book every month for the rest of my life, and I would be happy. And Gabriel Garcia Marquez, of course, those, I think, yes. And then the writer who has helped me the most to develop is my graduate school teacher. Her name is Janet Peary, and whenever I wanted to give up along the way, I would send her an email or send her or call her. And she'd always call me back and help me figure out how to fix it, whatever it was. So those are mine. Those are my influences.
Community.
Yeah, and I want to speak for the folks who aren't here to also emphasize Laura as mentor.
Yes. Right.
Because even with all the difficulties you're hearing Laura describe, she's, and I've been at those query gatherings, large and small, where you've mentored so many people who, not just the folks in the book who are extraordinary writers, but just people who are booksellers, people who are, who writing picture book, children's books. So thank you, Laura. So that's an opportunity to give you your flowers.
Thank you.
It is exciting to see, though. I mean, this is what we do, right? Hold the door open.
Yes.
Any opportunity we get. I mean, I've always said this. My job as a bookseller is to hold the door open.
Yes.
And when the world comes through, that's awesome. And if you have to nudge them a little bit, well, I am a human border collie. This is what booksellers do. This is actually the fun part of being a bookseller, where you can sort of tap people and say, "Hey, listen, you may have thought that you knew all of the things, but I have a thing." And I have an audience question, too. What makes a short story stand out in your mind?
I love to be pulled into the narrative within the first few paragraphs.
Right.
Or, in the case of Edwidge, sometimes it's the first sentence.
line.
Yes. Immediately, you're in, and you want to know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
I also love to have multiple narratives in a short story, and feel as if it's important for me to have an understanding of not just the main character, but also the ancillary characters that are part of that journey for that me.
Yeah.
I love to hear the musicality in the story.
Yeah.
I lean into the lyrics in each line. I want to feel as if I'm such a part of this journey. I'm literally in the circle with these characters.
I was going to say the first sentence. I really want to be like pulled out of my life immediately.
Yes.
For me, that's, you talked about Marquez and, like the first sentence of 100 Years of Solitude.
100 Years of Solitude.
I'm not among those people who can recite it from memory, but...
I almost can.
Go ahead.
I can paraphrase it, but he talks about he and his father, as he faces the firing squad, he remembers the day when he and his father went to discover ice.
Yeah.
Yes.
They went to discover ice.
Yeah.
He
And then
had
there's the fire squad, but then there's ice discovery.
Yes.
So, yeah, that just kind of, that's for me in all the work, because we're so distracted by so many things. Like if I can't get through the first page, it's hard to continue.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have to put it down.
Yeah.
For me, I'm glad I brought my notebook because I have an answer. I didn't know that question was coming, but I have
exquisite
an answer.
handwriting.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you. I wrote, when I was thinking about this on the train coming down, the stories that I love best tell me what someone has been through and how they survived it.
Yeah.
And that's what I want in a short story. What were the obstacles? What were the roadblocks? What were the complexities? And how did you get through them? That's what
And then
I
you
wanted
can
the story
use
to
that in your own life.
Yes.
Right? Like Toni Morrison mentioned in her Noble lecture, the songs, the literature, and the poems full of vitamins. And that's what I feel kind of restores me, lifts me up, shores me up whenever I encounter a problem. Right? I get the answers in those songs, in literature, in those poems. Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, everything's in conversation, right? I mean, for me, books are context. And whether that's framing something that is sitting in front of, I mean, when life gets weird, my first thought is there's got to be a book.
There's a book about it.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a book. I mean, I will totally own this, and my family knows this, so this is nothing new to them. But after my mother died, I read Stiff. That was my response.
Mary Roach?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And, my brother may have raised an eyebrow at me, and then he was like, oh, yeah, it's just you, whatever. So, yeah, that kind of is my answer to everything. It's like, well, I don't really know how I'm feeling about something, but there's a book.
There's a book about it.
There's a book, and then I will figure out where I'm going. But I love the idea that you can pull from poetry, you can pull from great narrative nonfiction. There's a novel, there's a story, there are a million different things. And when I think about some of the books, I mean, I read a lot of Updike when I was young. I read a lot of Cheever when I was young, partially because I was trying to figure out my parents. And I know I am not alone in that.
You're not.
They did what they could. But I love the idea that we can be in conversation with people that maybe we've never met or aspired to meet or have seen clips of. I will never get tired of watching James Baldwin on YouTube. That is a good use of YouTube.
Yes.
It's exciting.
It is.
It's really exciting. And when I think about sort of where all of you are in your careers and how you've fostered this creativity, I'm going to coast off of an audience question. What does the creative process look like for you?
I'll start. Okay. So for me, the creative process on an ideal day, which usually occurs during the summer, is I get to read anything for an hour before I start my own writing. I usually, not even usually, I think I always read with a pen in hand. I prefer hard copy so I can mark it up, and then my trusty Dragonfly journal so that I can write notes or write if a story or something that I'm reading sparks a line or answers a question, then I can write it down. If it's during the semester and I don't have the time to invest a full hour in a full book, then I read poetry, and then I do a little something, and then I go to class. But that's what it is. It's always, for me, it's always reading before writing.
Yeah.
I mean, I always hear in that question like a quest for that person in terms of their process, and I always tell people to just write around the life you have.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that Lucille Clifton said that she would write, she's like, people was like, Lucille, I didn't know you had all these children. She's like, that's why my poems are so short. And then she talked about writing at a red light. Like she would write her poetry at red lights. And so I think it's just, I try to write around the life I have now, which involves teaching. And just like, so tomorrow we'll go back to my novel again, after turning my grades in today. And so just like whatever is happening to write around when you have young children, I used to always write at night. That's still my preference, but as I'm getting older and I'm reading the science on sleep, I'm trying but it just depends with the circumstances, sort of where I am.
And when I was writing, it's taken a second seat with Kweli, but when I was writing consistently, I was up at 4 or 5 and would usually start with music. And then move to the pages.
I also think, though, that putting together a magazine is a creative act. I mean, I think sometimes we have this tendency to want to limit what we see as creative. And I think the world is changing so quickly in bizarre ways that we may as well find the creative act in whatever thing that we're making. So in terms of the magazine, though, what's your creative process like?
I still like to start at 4 or 5.
Okay. That is not me, but okay.
That is not me either.
It's the quiet part of the day.
Right, okay.
And you don't have the interruptions that start coming in at 8:30, 9 o'clock.
True. I mean, yes.
Yeah.
I do. That I respect. That I do respect, but I just, 4 is early. I can do it for flights. That's about it. But otherwise, I'm not built for that. We do have a book signing piece that I am going to get to, but before I do that, is there a piece of advice you might have for someone who's starting out, who's thinking, I don't know, should I send my work into the world? I mean, you've got people who are quick to share things, which is great, and sometimes you've got people who are sort of saying, well, it's not done yet, it's not perfect, it's not this. And, perfect doesn't really exist. So, advice, please.
I tell writers that they have a good sense of when they've done all they can on their own. And I'm always open to voices. And I will take a story that's maybe in need of some editorial assistance and work with them until it's ready to be published in Kweli. And it's a joy to do that. I actually seek out writers who are in need, because I want to see them fly. And they don't necessarily need to have an MFA. They just need to have a desire to tell a story and to pull the reader in.
I often find myself like telling younger writers to be patient. Because I think there is such an eagerness to be immediately published. So I'll say, get the work to the best state that it can. And like you're saying, Laura, to the point where it's like, I can't do any further. And if this is the best you can do right now, but don't be in such a hurry to just like try to get your first story out there. Like just have patience with yourself and really take the time to write the best work that you can.
They took all my answers. But mine would be, this may sound a little weird, but I'm among writers, so it's okay. Encourage yourself. All over my writing room, I have quotes about perseverance. And I have a writers group that I've attended. I think we've been meeting for more than 20 years. We try to meet every month. It doesn't always work. They were people I met when I was in graduate school. So I'm going to repeat myself, but I would say find ways to encourage yourself and persevere and find a group of creators. And I don't think they necessarily have to be writers, because everyone in my group is not a writer or is not presently writing, but we encourage each other in whatever projects we're working on, and we're accountable. So that would be find someone to be accountable to who cares about what you're doing, and that'll keep you going.
An accountability partner.
Accountability partner.
Yeah, and the bookseller says read everything.
Read everything.
I mean, read everything.
Everything.
Read the stuff that you're not writing. Read the stuff that you think feels like cultural vegetables. Read everything. That's, also it's kind of one of life's great pleasures is to read everything.
There's an author that I share with our writing workshops, The Art of the Short Story, who says you should read as if the next day you'll lose your eyesight.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay, I think we're all going to sit here.
And then we have Annie Dillard who says, write as though you were a terminal patient. Right? Like write as though, because she says, well, that's the human condition.
Right.
Yes.
So again, it all comes back to connection and community and living in the world with context. So it's not a passive act.
No.
None of it is passive. Well, that's where I say thank you very much, Laura, Edwidge, Princess. This was so much fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.